Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast, the Security Awareness Series, episode 140. I'm Chris Hadnagy, founder and CEO of Social Engineer LLC, social-engineer.org, and the Innocent Lives Foundation, and I am your host for this podcast since 2009. Does that date me? Like, am I really old because of that?
Very much, yes.
Okay, well, as you heard, my wonderful co-host, Ryan MacDougall, is here. Thanks for joining me, Ryan.
Hey, Chris. Happy to be here. I'm Ryan MacDougall. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Social Engineer. I'm in charge of making sure the machine of SECom runs as it should, which is part of their penetration tests and client initiatives. I've been in the information technology field for 23 years, with the past 8 years being in security specifically, and happy to be here.
Glad to have you, too. This is a brand new series. If you're listening, you know this is only our second time doing this, so we're excited to have your feedback about this kind of a podcast and what we're all learning from it. This episode is sponsored by Social Engineer LLC. I'm sure as all of you know, we're a premier information security consulting and training company. We've been around since 2003. We specialize in understanding the art and science of social engineering. So we focus on human-based attacks and social engineering attacks. And with this in mind, we've been working hard on providing education for organizations so they can take action to lead them to protection. We do that through services like phishing as a service, Vishing as a service, and social engineering risk assessments, as well as our conference, which is coming up on March 11 through 13, virtual now because of COVID. So you could check that out at humanhackingconference.com, and you can get more information about our services at social-engineer.com. Now, enough of that. Let's talk to our awesome guest here today. We are joined by Julie Rinehart, who I've known for quite a few years. I met her in a class that she came to, but she's been in the information security industry for over 12 years. She's been focused on making individuals and corporations aware of significant cyber threats. She's been in charge of creating creative approaches to outdated and ineffective security training. Julie is currently working as the Information Security Awareness and Outreach Lead at a biotechnology company. And Julie, thank you so much for coming and joining us. We're really excited to have you here.
Happy to be here.
So 12 years in this industry, you've probably seen a lot of things change. Maybe we could start with, how did you get started in InfoSec? What was your introduction to it?
You know, it's funny. That is my favorite question to ask people in our industry because it didn't exist, right, at one point, and it just kind of came. So I have a business background, like I'm sure most people, right? So I defaulted to business, not really knowing what I wanted to do. And then I took a job at a school that made automated calls for the healthcare industry. So think refill reminder kind of thing. And in that particular role, I learned that people are predictable. It's something you learn in school. You take stats and everything else, and you pass the tests and whatnot. But for me to actually see it come around was amazing. And so through the analytics that was happening at the time, based on demographic information, like the sound of the voice, these were all, pre-recorded, right? So it was like sound of your voice, the type of person, accent, age, all of that would absolutely show how far certain people within different demographics would stay on and how far down on the call tree that they would land. And it blew my mind, truly. Like I would see it live, like a slot machine, right? Just like you do with phishing results, they're just coming through and you can just see it's like where they stop and where they don't. And I was fortunate enough to be there when they just started doing this kind of analytics. And one of the guys that was doing this was amazing and would explain it all to me, which was awesome. But it was also really creepy, right? So from that perspective, it was really creepy. And I just really remember at the time thinking, like, this is something, I guess. Like it was just, I didn't really know, but it just seemed a little bit weird, but effective for what we were doing. I mean, we were doing things in a positive fashion. So then from there, I wanted to shorten my commute from an hour and a half. So I basically took the first job. I applied to like a ton of different places, and I took the first job. I didn't even know what the job was. I didn't really fully understand it, but as luck would have it, it was basically an entry level into security, and it was to answer customers' questions on how you secure the company, right, and the data that you have. And so that gave me that kind of wide view of security, kind of understanding all the different domains, the practical piece of it, which is to me the most interesting and why people care. And then, from there, I moved into security awareness, and that's, where I've been forever since.
That is an interesting journey
Yeah.
into InfoSec, especially in a time when it appeared, at least, it was very difficult for women to get into InfoSec. You took a pretty hard path. You took the upward hill. I mean,
Yeah, and it's funny because it was true. And I just realized recently that I've had mostly women managers
hmm,
in security, which I also it didn't dawn on me until just recently when I was kind of thinking back on it. But it was. The other thing at the time I remember was all entry level jobs still required years of experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of one of those things where because I was like so desperate just to get closer, I just applied to everything, which normally I wouldn't, right? And I think generally as women, you tend to look at the job and say, oh, I didn't tick every single box. I'm going to move on to the next one. And in this case, I was just like, it was kind of like spamming my resume everywhere. And I was lucky in this particular instance. But yeah, I honestly regularly think back on how much I appreciate the circumstances that just led me into this field because I am extremely passionate about what we do. So really worked out.
so was it the way that they were using that data to analyze people that really drove you to want to understand more and be like basically inside the mind to help protect people? Is that was the motive?
So the first motive was just getting any job. But when I started seeing what security was and then how the companies are compromised and even more than that, just people are scammed in general, that's when I went back and I said, this is the reason why. And this is what has really shaped my thought process on all security awareness stuff that we do that leans away from what a lot of people will say as the stupid user. Because I see full on, that's not literally, there was data proving that that's not the case. Just like I am not a scientist, but it doesn't make me a stupid person. They're doing them and we're going to do us and help them. But that is the reason why, it helped kind of shape everything that I've done since then from a security awareness perspective.
That's a great point. I really agree with the getting away from a stupid user perspective. That's an awesome point to make.
Yeah, I agree with that. For us here, it's one of those things that we always cringe when we hear a company want to promote this user philosophy. Now, you adopted that really early on, especially in an industry where the stupid user was kind of a deal. Like that's the way IT people taught. It was like, well, you fell for that phishing email, fired, and you really adopted that very early. How do you think that helped shape your career, having that adopted methodology?
It's one of those things where as I take jobs and, switch, companies, that's where I interview the company because I won't take a job at a company where they don't have that same view because it just won't work. So that's kind of how, I've been incredibly fortunate to have amazing CISOs, that are totally, even if maybe they don't 100% believe in it at the beginning, are absolutely open to the idea of exploring it. And then we're able to prove the effectiveness of it, and then the culture that there follows. So I feel like I've had a series of good luck, but I've also am incredibly persistent.
Yeah, but
So
that's a great
that,
thought process. It's like you don't just go like you're interviewing the company for your personality fit. I love that idea. Like that you actually went out and yeah, you may have a company that offers you a great salary, great benefits, but hey, you're not the right fit for me. That kind of cultural thinking is beautiful in my opinion. That's something that I think is a great kind of first lesson we can put in this podcast is I don't know if I've ever done that. When I was looking for a job in the past before I owned my own company, went into a company thinking, will you actually work with my moral structure? I think I just went like, okay, hey, that salary is good. I'll take it and see how it works. I really love that thought process, Julie. That's
well,
that's
I
impressive.
will say though, it also helps to be in a 0% unemployment industry, right? So again, it kind of comes back. I can't say, that if I were completely desperate, and that's also been something that's
Sure.
been very helpful. But, it's kind of like everything else. When you're asking about, your salary, you're also asking about the benefits because you're going to be spending more in your benefits, your salary goes down. And so from that perspective, I've always kind of gone into it in a holistic point of view. And then I also ask about the like 5-year vision that they have for the program because that's my goal. You can spin anything up and there are people who throw technology at any problem and then wonder why nothing is fixed, without having that kind of thought process kind of for the future. But my goals are always to see if we align, especially in the long term. And it doesn't always work, right? So in some cases, people aren't familiar with the methods that I might be used to using. The same methods may not work at every single company, of course. But if our like whole long game of this does work out, then to me, that's where you kind of have that better match and a better partnership with whomever your leadership may be.
Yeah, I love the thought. So, what would you say are some of the biggest milestones that you're proud of in your career so far?
Oh, interesting. So I've set up 3 security awareness programs so far. 3 different companies, different sizes, and some global, some not. So we've had kind of all of those pieces, technical, non-technical, different industries, right? So for me, when you go in, it's all about kind of understanding who the audience is. But the end game, right, for all of these things, in my opinion, is always culture. So the goal for me is always to change it where or maintain it, maybe it's already existing, but to have it be where it is a two-way conversation with the quote business and security instead of the ivory tower creepy people watching everything that you're doing, or the productivity police. Kind of really depends on what you're walking into. So I feel like I have achieved that at each company, but there have been different moments in each campaign, I guess, where each company where, you do kind of have these like, oh, like almost like just, I don't know, moments where when you're in the middle of it, you're like, oh, now I get it, and I think the other thing about it too is that it's always changing. So that's kind of the other piece where it's kind of hard for me to say like it's a milestone because, to me, every one of them is very different. But I don't know. So I guess there's been a few. This is a really roundabout way of answering, I guess, and not answering your question. But I don't know.
Even a non-answer is an answer, so it's okay. We're okay with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of bridge on what you were talking about, where you started these awareness campaigns and even programs in multiple companies. Has there been any common thread that you've had to employ in each of these companies, or maybe a common thing that you had to overcome in each of these companies to kind of get a successful program going?
Yeah, so the easiest one there is to introduce yourself as not the vendor because almost always they assume that you are a vendor. That's probably like 2 years worth of work, depending on the different company. But when you set up like a table at like a lunchroom or something, my favorite ever was when somebody signed up their child, so like their adult child had a law firm and they signed up their law firm for our services. And I said,
That's
so
great.
that's amazing.
I have not heard that one before. So that's
Mm.
actually an interesting one.
Oh,
Okay.
really? Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel
yeah.
like I found that to be consistent. Or if you work at a company where they sell security services, that you're not the commercial, right?
Uh,
So, kind of to change that lens and to kind of help them understand who you are and the services that you as a department offer. To me, that's always the first kind of level. Because if they don't know who you are and what you do, why would they ever interact with you? And the interaction is my goal.
so the interaction with the employee base is the goal now. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Why is that so important in the role that you have or have
So
had?
so I just believe that it's the human intel feed that we're cultivating, right? So from an intelligence standpoint, security awareness, that's what we're doing. I always say that it's way more important for you to report the email than it is if you clicked on it, right? So it's all about kind of, always like honing in on that piece of it from their perspective. But from their perspective, if you don't respond, they stop responding. So it's that back and forth, engagement that we're regularly like that's what the security awareness teams that I've been a part of, that's our goal is to maintain it and maintain it in a way that's consumable for whomever it is on the other end, which at one company is many different audiences that consume information in many different ways, which is what makes it challenging and fun.
So maybe you can give us a tip or two for people who are hearing this and thinking, I have a population that just doesn't get it. Like they don't want to report emails. They're afraid. They think they're going to get embarrassed or humiliated. How do you make that cultural shift so that people start to feel more comfortable reporting, even if they did click?
So There's a couple different kind of people, I guess, but for me, it's about listening, right? So I feel like listening is probably the number one thing that you should be doing in our field. To understand the type of job they have, what their reservations are, will help break down that barrier. And the easiest like first step could be just having like maybe not now, but having like a lunch table, right, where you are able to have that one-on-one, it's not being recorded, it's not, whatever kind of a conversation. I've also found that after doing business unit presentations, as soon as you, like if it's in person and a call, as soon as you hang up the phone, that's when the good stories start, from everybody else. Like that's when they open up, that's when they start talking to you. And I think that, once they understand as a person, like the human who actually works in the department, that you're not judging them and you can't, right? So that's the other piece, I guess. If you're a judgy person, this approach is not going to work for you, but they have to understand that authenticity of you and how you are. So for me and the teams that I've been on have always been very genuine and all care kind of about that high level mission of keeping individuals in the company safe. And so when you start talking about somebody, even if they're talking about, their own personal email or something that happened 5 years ago, having the conversation where they talk through it, they get who you are and who's, going to be consuming the information on the other side. So I have found success with that. In person, to me, is always the best way. And now I find it that it's face to face virtual is the same. It's kind of that piece, and also to have stories readily available so that they're not the only one. So when they start telling you about the scam that they fell for or whatever, you can say, I know, I've seen this, and I've other people have run into that problem too, and here's why. This is the tactic that was used to manipulate you and all of these other people, right? So to kind of normalize it. It's slow, but it's, again, it kind of goes back to that, I forget what it's called, but like where it's, you don't influence from the top down, it's from the influencers up. So when you find the influencer, that's always been the approach that we found. And then when you find the, like globally from that perspective for global people, it's about finding the same kind of individual at a local level that can also be that help. Most cases people have ambassador or champion programs that
Mhm.
leverage them, but it's the same idea.
Sounds very human intensive, like very,
Yeah.
like you're going to spend a lot of time with these people and
I
have to
like
really
people.
invest. Yeah. But I mean, that seems like then it's a perfect job for someone like you, where if someone really hates interacting with others or showing empathy and compassion, which it sounds like you have to have a lot of that in order to do this job. I don't know. I don't want to say the answer for you what I'm thinking, but it just feels like you need to be a very people interested, empathetic, and compassionate person to do the job in the right way for security awareness.
I think when you're launching the program, yes, I think you can also kind of train people in that way, because when you start hearing these real stories and really why people fall for things, it starts to build the empathy in people that maybe wouldn't have found it otherwise. But again, this is what I'm talking about too, is more about the personal like interaction, when you're emailing, you're talking, any kind of, there are other elements of the program that other people can leverage if it's not the most comfortable area. So I wouldn't ever want somebody to feel discouraged if that's not an area that they have a strength in. But I think if you're rolling it out and your really aim at the beginning is to overcome those kind of challenges where people are not engaging with you, again, this has just been my experience, the best and kind of fastest way to grab that attention from them.
So, do you have a significant success story that maybe you're most proud of, that when you had to overcome one of these major challenges, like it really accomplished a goal that you were really, really proud of?
So, I mean, the last two programs that I've done, you could see the transformation just with people, with how many reports, from a metric standpoint. So it's always hard to leave. And it's kind of like my joke, not really a joke, but I'm always like, oh, like, how's that program doing? Like, you don't kind of want to let it go because, you put so much effort into it. So, I mean, it's not specific, I think, is what you're looking for, but to me, that's kind of it. But the other, there's just so many examples of like people who try to do the right thing and then mess up. So one of the companies I worked for, we had one of those, I forget what the scam, it was the recruitment scam where they pretend to be a company, post a job, it's a work from home and all this money that you get. But in the meantime, since you've been hired, even though you used AOL Instant Messenger, Pause for the early 90s reference. So, it was from that point, like that was the overall scam that I heard about that was happening. Obviously, it's not an internal thing, it's external, but we were investigating it. And so I kind of asked if I could listen into the call that the investigator was having with the person who was scammed because of the AOL thing. I couldn't wrap my head around it, and I was starting to be judgy, as I just said. Clearly. So I was starting to be judgy and I was like, how? You have to go down and like download AOL Instant Messenger and like pull up your like, college whatever screen name. I don't know what you would do in that. So in any case, the logistics behind it was kind of what was a little bit interesting for me. I just was a fly on the wall listening. And in this particular instance, when they provided all the communications that they had with the scammer, they also included that in the IM, they said they were asking for your W-2s and, all the other documents that you need. And they said, I don't feel comfortable with this. Do you mind if I send it to you encrypted?
Hmm.
And I thought, yep, but nope.
Uh-huh.
Right? Because obviously, I am totally like envisioning like the mustache twirl of the guy, like, yes, happy to accept that encrypted. But again, like it goes back to the point of like, it's not a stupid user, right? That whole instance and what was happening, and in their life, they were so desperate for a job because they'd had no job for so long. And like, to kind of sit and hear that whole scenario absolutely makes you change the way, you think through all of these things. And that's kind of why when you said about the empathy piece, I say you can be trained to help have that because again, I was super judgy at the beginning of that scam. And then when I was able to really understand the why, like what motivated them, why were they doing this, it really helped. And then that particular thing, albeit didn't have anything to do with our security awareness program, influenced a lot of what we did because now it's like another angle where it's like, we've introduced encrypted email and you understand how to use that, but also now verify who you're sending things to and that whole piece. So, there's been a lot of like kind of, different things that stand out. I don't know, just in the different programs that we've done that kind of I just keep carrying with me as a lesson learned, I guess.
Yeah, that's really cool. One of the things that I think people could pick out of this is, for me, it's always a big topic, is the empathy piece, is trying to understand why people fall for things and don't just make the assumption it's because you're stupid. I have a friend who, sadly, he's dying, he's in hospice, and he doesn't have a lot of money, and he wanted to leave his wife something. And it just so happened that, he put on Facebook that he was like dying in hospice and whatever. And then, of course, he gets hit up by this person who's like, if you give me $500, I have this company that will, transfer 500,000 into your account. And out of desperation on his deathbed, he's thinking, I want to leave my wife something because I'm leaving her nothing. And I'm going to take the risk. And it's like, you could say, boy, how stupid are you? No, it wasn't. It was literally his dying desperation that he wanted to make sure he left his family with something before he left. And when you understand that, it's really hard to say, wow, you're stupid, because it wasn't stupid.
Yeah, that's so sad. And I guess that's really what motivates me. It motivates me also to train people not only in the work environment but home, but also specifically like when it comes to elders in your family, right? I have been focusing on kids and kind of going at I'll train the trainer, like train you to help with your kids and then you'll retain the information better, right? The whole what's in it for me. But recently I've started kind of thinking about making that more of a flip to elder, friends, parents, whomever, because like at my previous job, my old coworker was telling me about a scam involving a family member that was, I believe, widowed and lonely and went online. Now, we've all heard in this industry, we've heard this scam before. But what was fascinating to me about this particular one was the exchange back and forth, the small money as these go, right? Car fix or whatever it was, help him out. And then after that, a tangible item was delivered to her as a thank you. So she received like an edible arrangement of some kind. So how, from a user perspective, like how can you sit there and like just point the finger like this is that old scam? Like that doesn't make any sense because now the game has been upped. And that investment of what $50 for that, like floral arrangement or whatever it happened to have been, that now I think it was like thousands and thousands of dollars. And then as these go, they hide them because they're embarrassed and they don't want to look stupid. Nobody wants to look stupid. So if you're going into any kind of program that you're creating and you have that mindset, to me, that's where it stops, because nobody's going to interact with you if you think that they're stupid, just like nobody, any elderly parents don't want to be viewed that way. So it's sad. And I will say that's kind of the harder part, I think, when we're doing our job, is to kind of have that like separation and, to because we can get so bogged down in them. I mean, the creativity is amazing in the different scams that are out
Yeah.
there. Obviously the tactics tend to be the same, but
I like the idea that you have of also including things that are personal, like not at work, right? So you're not just telling them, hey, here's the scam you have to be worried about at my company. You're like, hey, take this home to your mom, your dad, your grandma, your grandpa. Like, to me, that's a huge deal, because when you make security personal, I feel like people will look at you more as their advocate, not adversary. Have you found that to be
I
the
agree.
case?
Yeah, and I think too, it's an incentive, right? So you can have tchotchkes all you want, give away all kinds of chargers and candy and whatever. But I think to get somebody to physically show up, which is probably the biggest challenge for any event that anybody has, it comes down to what the heck are they getting? So in this case, almost everybody has a child, knows a child, is an aunt, is an uncle, like, you have a neighbor, you know, or you've just heard of these crazy things happening and they just kind of want to see what the car accident's all about, right? So, you kind of have all of these people. So I have been we have a specific speaker who comes in who talks about keeping kids safe online. And before she comes in to speak, I regularly will say, okay, these are the elements within that I need to drive home from my perspective, because the same tactics are being used against kids as they are against the adults, right? So whether it's through a Sony PlayStation to be groomed or it's through LinkedIn, it's the same tactic. So from my perspective, we would pull out those particular elements and kind of reinforce it. So as an example, in October, I had asked about, I think it was talking about phishing emails, but my concern is always when it comes to everybody's home. Obviously, nobody should be using your work computer, but what if, right? So in that case, a lot of people are using Google Classroom, right? That's a very common thing in all of these schools. So why wouldn't those be spoofed as phishing or as any kind of like watering hole or anything, like any kind of attack really? And so we started threading through that whole piece on keeping your computers, obviously, like would mention, you should not be using your work computer, and it's for these reasons. Because if your child is using your home computer and they click on a bad link, it's going to infect. So make sure your computers are clean. And they kind of reinforce those things, but through the lens of like a child. So I've been using her for, I don't know if it's like 4 or 5 years. But I will say it also matters the tone. So the reason why I like her and I keep bringing her back is because the energy level and her way of creating humor in these obviously can be very depressing conversations is amazing. And I feel like she totally nails it from that level. So I think that to me is why I've always leveraged the whole what's in it. It goes back to marketing, really. That's what's in it for me. And so kids tend to be that denominator.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
So what do you think is one of your biggest challenges that you had to overcome, either professionally or personally?
I think personally, a lot of times people don't think that I have the experience that I do. It's kind of one of those things where even though like I have on my resume the amount of time, the amount of programs that I've done, it's kind of like, nah, maybe not, and I don't.
You look so young.
Stop it. Go on. Let's talk for hours.
No.
But
You do. You look really young. So is it possible that people look at you and go, come on, you just out of college. You can't possibly have experience.
God, I could talk to you for hours. I mean, maybe, right? But it has been a challenge. And so for me, it's kind of one of those things where I don't want to sit here and just be like, but in my last job, I was able, and the one before that, because you can't do that also. I mean, every company's thing is different, and, you draw on your experience, but you can't obviously replicate it. It doesn't make any sense, especially in, well, most cases. So as a personal level, to me, that's that. And then professionally, I think the biggest issue is getting people in even InfoSec or IT to understand the value of security awareness. As it's not a control, a technical control, I think it's really hard for people to understand, what it does. I'm not providing regular metrics on the amount of emails that are blocked or the threats that were mitigated or the risks that have been closed, right? So from this perspective, it's a lot different. How do you show quantitatively like the value of a conversation, right? Or how do you really measure culture in a way that technical people can understand? So that has always been my challenge, and to kind of get the buy-in, from like your own departments, like at different companies. And so that's, I think, probably the one that I see a lot.
So to kind of couple that together with what you were saying earlier about you enjoy the interaction with the individual users and like setting up a table in the lunchroom and things like that, what's a typical day for you look like to try to execute on that type of vision?
Yeah, so I'm huge into gamification right now. I found such success with it in the sense that it's been done really smart. So like we have some great vendors that, provide these kind of services. And it's not the like Jeopardy slide, deck that y'all might be remembering, right? Family Feud, or there's a bunch of different ones like that. But gamification has been amazing because it gets people out of their like shell. You're not passively sitting there watching a presentation or a CBT of any kind, right? You're involved, number one. You're interacting with your team, and I can observe what is happening, right? So in those kind of snapshots, and it's usually hilarious. And so everybody is usually having a really good time. Like, it's even when it's cutthroat, which to be honest with you, as an instigator, I will always push for cutthroat because I just think it's amazing. But so like that has been kind of the way, especially since COVID, we've been doing a lot of them online. So it provides the what's in it for them is team building exercise. I call it accidental learning. My goal is that you don't even realize you're learning it until you're in the moment. You're like, oh, that's security awareness, girl. Ugh. And so they kind of remember it at that point. But inevitably, and this is something I'm going to start like tracking to try and find a way to kind of get metrics on this, that if I do like one of those games, which as it happens, today I did one. So I was just thinking through my day. Within a week, have somebody on that small team reach out and say, hey, this weird thing happened. And maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's something. And most of the time, it's a great conversation after the fact and a follow up. So, that's kind of one of the things. I mean, it's a multifaceted program. So we do everything from gamification to assessments and obviously the CBT.
Yeah. I love that. I'm smiling because we just did an escape room, an online escape room as a team with Living Security. And I'm like you. I was throwing the gauntlet down, teasing the other team that whoever loses gets fired.
I wonder who won that game.
And then I lost.
Stop it.
My team and I lost. So
Wait, Ryan, do you have a trophy? Is there?
There's no trophy.
There's an image in our chat that is enough of a trophy.
Absolutely. What do you mean no trophy? Come on.
So bad. But at the end of the day, it was so much fun. Like, we had these two teams. Ryan led one team. I led another team. We both competed in the same escape room with just time compete, and you learned something at the end of the day, but it was fun. And for us as a team, afterward, we all got together, had a team meeting, just sat around and laughed and talked. And it was a nice way to kind of end last year with a security awareness event, but that also wasn't just, hey, watch this boring 20-minute video about nothing,
Right.
And I agree with you. At the end of it, we all feel better for having done that event and we enjoyed it, but we also walked away with like, oh, I got something out of that.
Honestly, I absolutely couldn't agree more. I think that, it's just an awesome opportunity to get people together. And more importantly, now that it's all online, everything is online, right? From an international standpoint, this is huge, right? This is something where I don't imagine I would have had the budget for a whirlwind tour. nor would I really want to, right? So now I can get myself out in front and have people face to face, like know who we are, what we as a like department in general for information security, kind of what we have, what are our services. It's basically a great marketing campaign for the whole program, which is great, but it also normalizes it, right? And I always joke about how security teams have the worst time with these games because they just go so in the weeds on like one particular topic. Or when we would do like in-person like events, like they would destroy things because they were just brute forcing this. And so it's kind of like that kind of normal. And I always joke about that, but I'm like, that's it. But I have found the most aggressive teams are the winners. Like,
Well, not in our case. I was aggressive. I was
Yep.
aggressive. I held secret meetings with my team.
All for
Man,
naught.
we did
All for naught.
practice sessions. It wasn't my fault. Our guy. No, okay. Anyhow. Let me get to a real question. Before I get to our final questions that I always ask, I want to know, like, in this career you've had, who would you call your mentors, and maybe give us like the best piece of advice that they gave you as you were being mentored?
so I think the data analytics person that I sat with at my first company truly opened my mind. Like, I think that was probably one of the most impactful things ever for me, just to truly see that. But aside from that, I've had some kind of different advice. Like, I remember one of my managers I reached out to years later, and I was like, stuck with me. He said to learn internal politics. And I always was the person was like, I'm not getting involved in that. I don't want to deal with it. I'm here to do my job, and that's that. And it wasn't like in a negative way. Like, it wasn't like I was just I was the person, the problem in that situation. It was just more of guidance to continue my career, but to understand kind of outside of my program and my scope to see what's happening wider. And that's helped me as an individual, obviously, but it's helped with my program, I think, and just in general, right? To always think outside of whatever. If I'm looking at one particular issue that's happening and I'm talking to an individual, like widening that scope really has helped in general. So, I mean, I think for me, that's a big part of it, kind of. And then it's honestly, security awareness is such a small network of people. So there are so many people within our industry, and in that respect, I mean specifically security awareness, that have found great success in different areas, whether it's simulations or gamification or whatever it is. And then they're so willing to share. So there are just a lot of people. But I think if anybody is listening and wants to be involved, join these networks, anytime you can talk to somebody. And I don't know, I have found amazing mentors, but they're specific, like there are a lot of people in there like specific areas.
That's great. Thank you for that. It's insightful because it's good for us. We do this often to kind of look back and reflect and think about where we came from and how we got where we are and what lessons we learned, which is really the whole basis of this series of the podcast. So, in line with that, our final two questions. Who are the colleagues that maybe you respect the most in your industry?
So for me, well, obviously people outside of security awareness, only in that we're such a small team, generally speaking. So at almost every company I've worked at, there have been individuals who will absolutely are super passionate, number one, about whatever it is they're doing, whether it's network security or, like secure code, like whatever it happens to be. And that they're always willing to sit and talk and have a conversation so I can fully understand whatever is happening in that area, as I'm not a technical person. And they don't, like rub technical like ego into it, I guess. Even though they're incredibly credentialed and whatnot, I found them at every single company. You
Mm.
find the others sometimes as well, but those are the people that really absolutely help, just as your own development, right, as a person in the field, but also for the program. Because when we're trying to understand what is happening, for them to be able to break it down and understand it and not feel like you're being, like a 2-year-old getting an exclamation, I think is amazingly useful and incredibly appreciated, especially, from somebody who's non-technical.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for that too. And then last but not least, because we have avid readers as our listener base, can you recommend a book or two, even if it's an audio book, we have all those too, whatever it is that you like to listen to or read?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm sure I know like you do this with all of your speakers.
Yep.
So I know like the general ones, like the influencer and like, Daniel Pink and kind of all of those have always helped. But I mean, aside from my list of trashy romance novels,
Hey,
uh,
we'll take them. It's whatever, like, it doesn't have to be about InfoSec or even this conversation. It just be books you like.
Whatever gets you through the day.
Yeah.
oh Lordy. Well, to be honest with you, I'm more of a podcast person. So
Okay.
aside from the Social Engineering LLC podcast, um, outside of the industry, I love Armchair Expert. I don't know if you ever listened
I
to
haven't. No.
Dax Shepard. So he does this, and it's the most eclectic group of speakers that are, it's amazing. And so, from my perspective, I love it because there's not one of them that goes by that I don't think, oh, like that was an interesting, useful thing that I end up actually applying within my job. But one that stands out, and I forget, apologies, which number it was, but they were talking to a reporter, I think, out of New Zealand, who did a whole thing on conspiracy theories. And it was like fascinating, the mindset, the psychology, how they started, and that whole thing. And of course, conspiracy theories run rampant, right, in our day jobs. So to me, I love Armchair Expert from just kind of a piece. And then like industry ones, I love the Cyberwire because it's like that quick, right? Get your information real fast. And I don't know if you guys have listened to Darknet Diaries.
Yeah.
I feel like I should be getting commission from them. I'm just kidding. But these are awesome. I love the storytelling
Jack is
that
great.
happens
He knows how to do an interview beautifully.
and string it all together. Like,
Yeah.
and they're amazing. And I would absolutely recommend them, especially for people who are, consider themselves non-technical in the field, because it gives an amazing explanation of a lot of these things that give you the ability to then go Google, right?
Yeah.
And that's always what I'm looking for. I'm happy to do my own research, but I need to sometimes know what it
Yeah.
is.
In the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. That's great. Oh, we haven't had someone ever ignore my question and offer a podcast suggestion, but that's great. I mean, first of
Chris,
all, I've
I've
never
known you
heard.
too long. I ignore too many of your questions, and
You
I
do. You do. I
apologize.
wish you would answer my email from November. I really do.
Well, and I
But
will also correct you. The first time I met you, see, and this is because you're just so big you don't even remember,
no.
bring it back, was RSA conference, and it had to have been over 10
Oh,
years ago.
wow. You
Where's
are.
that in your Rolodex? You should put that next to my name.
That is true. Wow. I remember that now that you said it.
Yeah, of course you did.
Common
Like the sales guy in you. You're like,
thoughts.
of course I remember that interaction.
No, that I
What do
can't.
you mean? You
I
were
can't.
wearing clothes, I believe. It was awesome.
You had hair. You had hair at
There
that
was
moment,
hair
right?
as
Yes,
well.
I remember that. You were a person.
I
Yeah.
was I could breathe too. I don't know if that
Yes,
that
that's what I
brings
clearly
it.
remember. That brings
Yeah.
it all home for me. You were a
But this
person
was a
with hair.
presentation you were talking about where somebody wanted to target somebody based on their child's cancer diagnosis. And I
Yeah,
just remember being like, what?
yeah.
What the hell is wrong with people? So that was my
Yes. Was
Christmas
that so?
cool.
Was that the round table that you were at, or was that the speech?
Nope, it was you were on a stage
Yeah.
with,
Okay.
with somebody else. I don't remember.
Michelle with Michelle.
Was it Michelle? Okay.
Yep. Oh wow, that is a blast from the past. That is a long
Wayback
time
Machine
ago.
for you.
Big time.
I think
Wow.
that was like when RSA was in one conference.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. When it was only 40,000 people and not. Yeah. Julie, as always, when we get to talk, since I've known you for a decade, which I remembered that. I was just looking
Clearly.
up. Back when you had hair and you were a person and can breathe.
Oh my God, I still have hair.
Oh,
This is an audio thing. People are gonna
oh yeah,
all
yeah,
kinds
yeah.
of videos.
She has hair. I mean, there's a couple on top still, so it's fine. Okay. But Julie, this was awesome. Thank you so much for
Oh,
being a
Yes,
guest
thank
on
so
the
you.
glad
show.
to have been
This was
invited.
really, really great and a lot of good information and a lot of good lessons. I love your theme of empathy and compassion being at the forefront of doing a security job, which is something that we promote here at Social Engineer. So hearing it out from an outside source is just very validating. So thank you for that.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is awesome and fun.
Well, Brian, another great show, another wonderful guest. If you want to follow Ryan on Twitter, your Twitter is
at Joe Montmania.
Excellent. We'll put that in the show notes. Teach you how to spell it. Don't ask, Julie. Don't ask. I'm easy, human hacker. And if you want the corporate one, it's SOC Engineer Inc. You can find us at social-engineer.org, social-engineer.com. Don't forget to check out the Human Hacking Conference from March 11 through 13, 2021, coming up virtual now. We're going to have some great speakers. We added a whole bunch of new stuff there. And you can check out my new book on humanhackingbook.com, just released last month. And let's see, besides that, please, if you'd like to support Innocent Lives Foundation, you can do that at innocentlivesfoundation.org. And a big shout out for Clutch for letting us use their music on our podcast. That's it, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.
See you.
Won't you lay your head down low?